All right. So, hey, everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that you probably use all the time.
Yeah.
And you probably don't even think about it. Talking about the weather in English.
Right.
Now I know what you're thinking. How can we spend a whole deep dive talking about the weather?
Well, it's a good question, actually.
It's more than just small talk, you know?
It's true. It's really fascinating, actually, because weather talk isn't just about practicalities, you know? It's a social lubricant. It's a cultural touchstone.
Right.
And even a source of humor.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I know you've said before that you sometimes struggle with small talk in English.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that talking about the weather is a good way to break the ice?
Um,
Or does it feel a little bit cliche to you?
I think it can be both, honestly. I think it's definitely a classic conversation starter, especially, in England,
Right.
where the weather is so unpredictable. But I think it's also easy to fall into these very predictable patterns. And you end up having the same conversation again and again.
Yeah. It's like any tool, I guess. You can use it effectively
Yeah.
or not so effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we go beyond nice weather we're having
Yeah.
and actually have an engaging conversation about the weather?
Well, one of the sources talks about idiomatic expressions related to weather.
Okay.
And these are phrases that go beyond the literal meaning. They kind of add a bit of color to your conversation.
Right.
So, for example, it's raining cats and dogs
Yeah.
is a much more interesting way to describe heavy rain than just saying it's raining heavily.
Okay, that's a good one. And I bet those idiomatic expressions are kind of tricky for non-native speakers to pick up on.
Oh, absolutely. They often
Right.
rely on cultural context.
Yeah.
And this kind of shared understanding. Another example is under the weather,
Right.
which means feeling unwell. If you don't know that phrase, you're going to be completely lost.
Right. So mastering these expressions
Yeah.
is key to unlocking a more nuanced level of English conversation.
Yeah.
And speaking of unlocking, one of our sources is even titled English Unlocked.
It's a great title.
I love that.
Yeah, it really highlights how something as simple as talking about the weather can open so many doors in terms of communication and cultural understanding.
One thing I always tell people learning English is to pay attention to how comedians use weather in their routines.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's such a good way
Yeah.
to pick up on the subtle humor and cultural references.
Yeah.
Do you have any other less obvious tips for our listeners to help them really master weather talk?
I think active listening is key. So, you're not just paying attention to what people say about the weather, but how they say it as well.
Right.
Do they sound enthusiastic, resigned, humorous?
Right.
Their tone of voice can tell you so much about their relationship with the weather.
That's such a good point. It's not just about the words. It's the emotions and the attitudes behind them.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to go beyond the basics. Ask follow-up questions. Share your own experiences with the weather. And maybe even throw in a relevant idiom or two.
So by mastering weather talk, you're not just gaining vocabulary, you're gaining this deeper understanding of English communication and culture.
Right.
It's about connecting with people, sharing experiences, and maybe even having a few laughs along the way.
And this raises a really interesting question. How does weather actually affect social customs and behaviors in different English-speaking cultures?
Oh, that's a great question. Think about that as you continue exploring the nuances of English.
Exactly.